So, you think you might be a type 8 on the Enneagram, but you're not sure. You still have questions. Well, that's a great place to start. And you're not alone. Oftentimes, that's exactly how most people's Enneagram journey begins, with questions. In this video today, my goal is to walk you through three things. First, look at the core motivations, fears, and desires that make up the heartbeat of a type 8. Next, it's to walk you through a checklist of if I am a type 8, then maybe these apply to me. I'll then look at what I call a cheat sheet, a high level overview of how an 8 shows up in the world. And lastly, I'll close out with so now what? I still want to go deeper. I want to learn more and walk you through what to do from there. But before we dive in, I want to highlight one of the things that has drawn even me to the Enneagram and I think is so important if you are someone that's just starting on your Enneagram journey. And it's this. The most important thing about the Enneagram is that it revolves around a person's core motivations. It's not just about how people behave. So imagine with me, if you will, an iceberg. When we look at an iceberg, we can only see the tip of it. There is a huge block of ice that's under the water that we don't see. This is similar to a person's personality. The tip of the iceberg are people's behaviors, how they show up in the world, whether they make their bed in the morning or always call their mom on Saturday because it's the right thing to do. These are things we can observe in individuals. What we can't see are what's motivating that person to make their bed, to call their mom. That's the underneath the surface. And that's what the Enneagram is looking at. So, as we dive in, I want you to keep in mind, even though you might see some of your behaviors in all 9 types on the Enneagram, it's most important to recognize what is my core motivation. So, as we get started, let's look at that for a type 8. Now, our type 8, and I oftentimes try to stay away from nomenclatures because I think giving titles to type can be a little misleading, but I do like this one. It's from Beatrice Chestnut, knowing the 8 as the active controller. So the motivation for a type 8 is to really assert their control, to make sure that they are not taken advantage of and avoid being vulnerable. The reason that they are motivated by this is because they fear if they are vulnerable or they don't assert their control, they could be harmed. They could be controlled by others. The desire ultimately for that type 8 is to protect themselves and protect others. Oftentimes, 8 have a strong orientation to the underdog. They want to protect those that can't always protect themselves. The desire is to make sure that they are not vulnerable or controlled. As a result of this, 8s show up. They are action-oriented. They are visionaries. They are big picture thinkers. One thing to really be cautious of, because I've heard this and I really want to push against it, is that 8s are bullies. That is simply not true. In fact, 8s are usually the ones that stand up to bullies. Or sometimes I hear, but 8s love conflict. Again, not true. 8s don't love conflict, but out of all 9 types, they are probably the most comfortable with conflict because they understand how valuable and necessary being direct and confrontational can be to move the dial forward. So, if this isn't resonating with you, if these core motivations and fears and desires aren't resonating, I really want to encourage you to go deeper. Watch all 9 videos that I post on each of the 9 types to get a better understanding of what your motivation might be. Now, if this is resonating, let's go through a checklist. Let's go one layer deeper. I'm going to read these off. So if you are a type 8, you might value independence, and dislike being controlled. You naturally take charge and often end up in leadership roles. You fight for justice and hate seeing others treated unfairly. You're direct and no nonsense in your communication style, and you expect honesty from others. You fiercely protect your loved ones. You struggle with vulnerability and prefer to show strength. You have quick action and trust your gut instincts. You have difficulty trusting others and prefer to maintain control. You can come across as intimidating due to the fact that you're assertive. You challenge authority or systems you believe are unjust. Now, if as I read those off, you were checking them off and off and off, there's a good chance that you are a type 8. So, how do you show up in the world? Now, this is a very high level overview. It's what I call your type 8 cheat sheet. And it looks at just how an 8, their style, their communication, how they make decisions to help you better understand the map that you use to navigate the world. So, again, 8s are assertive and decisive. They are a fire ready aim personality. They fall in the body center, which I talk about in other videos if you're looking at the centers of intelligence, but they fall into that body center, so they are naturally oriented to action. Their communication style is they're direct. They say what they think. When they make decisions, they are going to make decisions again from the perspective of how do I protect those that are vulnerable? And let's move into action. 8s are not ones that want to sit around and lament. If there's a problem, before you've even finished the problem statement, they want to jump in and start taking action to find a solution. The strengths that 8s bring to the table as a result of all of this is they are big picture thinkers. Oftentimes, the 8s that I've worked with are CEOs, they are entrepreneurs, they take bold action, and they're resilient. It takes a lot to beat an 8 down. Blind spots for a type 8 are they can have control tendencies. I know an 8 once said it's not that they always need to be in control, but they will never be controlled. So it can be a little tricky in that situation. But the blind spot is really just this fear of vulnerability. If I'm vulnerable, I can be taken advantage of. So they assert their power and their strength. Pet peeves are 8s don't like it when you beat around the bush. Oftentimes we're told when you have to give someone a criticism to sandwich it with 2 compliments. I don't advise doing this with a type 8 because the moment you start to compliment a type 8, their antennas on their head or the hair on the back of their neck goes up. They start to question you. Why are you saying this? You're too flowery. You're too nice. I'm becoming skeptical of you. They want you to be direct. Don't be mean, but be direct, and an 8 will appreciate it. They also are their pet peeves can be around being exploitative of others or inefficient. 8s are definitely drawn to having strong values and missions and are social justice oriented. So the challenge for you, if you're a type 8, is how do you balance power with vulnerability? How do you bring those two together? Because when you do, you become the ultimate power. How others see a type 8 is that they are strong, powerful, and decisive. Now, as you see on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the 8 with 4 other numbers. And I'm not going to go in depth on this because this is really just a high-level overview, but this highlights the different the different types that an 8 interacts with. An 8 can go to a 2 and a 5 and has 9 and a 7 wing. I'll go more in depth in later videos, but I think it's important to note exactly the placement on the Enneagram symbol and how it does have an interaction with these other types. So, now what? What do I do now that I do have a strong grasp of that type 8 motivation, that need for control to avoid being vulnerable? And I see how I show up in the world with my big picture, my action oriented, my need to find solutions to problems quickly and to be very direct in how I communicate. What do I do now? Well, now's the fun part. This is the most exciting part in your journey where you get to start to study, go in depth. I have a couple resources here and I'll link more in the video notes, but some of the books that I have found revolutionary are The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut, or Personality Types Using the Enneagram of Self-Discovery by Riso and Richard Hudson. Listen to podcasts. I'm a podcast person. So the Enneagram 2.0 or Enneagram IRL, Typology are all great resources to go deeper. From there, explore. This is just the surface in understanding that you're a type 8. But the next thing to do is I'd really encourage you to look at subtypes. Are you a self-preservation 8, a social 8, a one-to-one 8? That will drastically change how you show up in the world. Also dive into centers of intelligence. I have a video on that one as well, where we talk about the body, the head, and the gut. If you're a type 8, you specifically want to look at how does your body wisdom show up in the world? Understanding the arrows. I just touched on that last page where we looked at how the 8 goes to a 2 and a 5, but has wings to 7 and 9. Understanding how that impacts you and how you show up in the world. And then finally, reflect. There is a wonderful practice called self-observation. And what self-observation is, it is when you do a behavior, pausing and observing it. No judgment, just, that was interesting that I found myself getting really frustrated after my friend didn't give me the response I wanted. Why did I get frustrated there? No judgment, just reflect. Start to see how you show up in the world in ways that maybe you haven't brought to the surface. Maybe it's been those unconscious behaviors, the underneath the surface. Bring it to light so you can start understanding yourself. The great thing about the Enneagram is it's not a tool designed to put you in a box, but rather it's a tool designed to get you out of the box you're already in. When I don't show up at a party, my personality does. When I don't show up at work, my default programming, my habitual patterns, they show up. And how much more powerful is it when we are at the bow of our ship, when we're steering and where we're going? I hope that was insightful for you and gave you a deeper understanding of who that type 8 is. I'll close out with one story, one of my favorite stories of a type 8. My mother is a type 8, and I think she really exemplifies how important it is to have 8s in our life. So several years back, my mom started a international tea cafe. She had a passion to bridge people from all cultures under one roof. And what better way to do that than over the number one beverage drink around the world, tea. She went on to get the highest level of certification and had over 150 unique tea blends that she came up with, each one with a unique specific name highlighting different cultures. She would bring people in from other nations that would perform, dance and share their artwork or give a lecture, all with the end goal of how do we bring about peace in a very divided time. An incredible mission, something that I am just so proud of to talk about. But the story is that at this tea cafe, it is still a retail business. And unfortunately, if you've ever worked in retail, it means you can get some dicey customers. And one day a customer had come into the shop and was being very, very rude to her employees. The tea wasn't hot enough. They didn't like it. And one of them threw the money on the table, demanding that they get a refund for it, swearing at her employees. And she walked out and said, I will absolutely not allow my staff to be treated that way. We're not looking for patrons like that. And it was the first time that her staff who was working that day said they had ever worked for someone who cared about them, who prioritized their well being over the customer is always right mentality. And that's, I think, a beautiful picture of how the type 8 shows up. They're not afraid to step in, intervene to ensure that people aren't being taken advantage of, while all the while under this umbrella of a beautiful mission, passionate about bringing about reconciliation. So I share that story because oftentimes I think the last thing we hear when we think about type 8s is how they're so oriented to conflict. But I think it's so opposite of that. I think when 8s are healthy and working on themselves, they are looking at bringing people together, using that power and that strength to do so. So thank you so much for giving this a listen, and hopefully my other videos will be helpful for you as well.